Hello there. If I owned a business in the hospitality sector in Wales, I would be putting it on the market pretty darn sharpish, thanks to the latest irrational musings of its tyrannical leader. So the Welsh First Minister Mark Drakeford is placing more restrictions on the people and flattening the hospitality sector. And this is the man who danced at a Diwali event while unsocially distanced and maskless. OK, he didn't technically break the rules, but he's the one who was urging other people to cover their faces and be sensible. Another one at the top who thinks they're immune, perhaps. Anyway, he's now shafting the hospitality sector in Wales from Boxing Day onwards. And this will result in loads of cancellations, as well as venues needing to spend more money on more staff to provide table service for their customers. Not only that, I thought that Wales had this health pass thing that was going to save the day. Isn't it working? Now, I do travel to Wales from time to time, travel rules permitting, to meet up with my co-pilot on this channel, Richard. He lives in the Brecon Beacons, and what a nice area of the world that is, and full of great pubs and eateries. And this is going to hit them hard. And you do have to wonder if people in Wales won't be looking over the border to see if an establishment in England has some spare room. Unless Boris does the same as Drakeford and Sturgeon, of course. And judging by what I've seen some of the scientists saying, then yes, I think we will see new restrictions in England from the 27th onwards. And Boris isn't very good at putting forward the legitimate political argument against more restrictions. And why do you think Rishi is lining up to hand out £6,000 to every venue in England? Now, what's this other nonsense Mark Drakeford has been spouting? Well, not only has he decided to outdo the new restrictions that Nicola Sturgeon has forced on Scotland, he and his Welsh cabinet have also decided that people can go to the pub, but if they go to work they could potentially be fined £60 for doing so, if someone, somewhere, deems that they didn't actually need to go to work. The premise presumably being that you must work from home if at all possible. But who is going to stop you in your car or on the street to demand you prove that you can't work from home? They'd be stopping people going shopping and people going to the pub. Or is Mark Drakeford planning on a series of police raids on office blocks up and down Wales? But it's actually worse than that. It turns out this rule has been in place before in Wales, but no fines were ever handed out. Drakeford puts it this way. The rule is there to protect workers, not penalise them. No fines were issued at all when these rules were previously in place. They're there to make sure that if a worker feels that an employer is unreasonable, they can point to regulations and say they are committing an offence to do so. It is to protect workers, not to penalise them. They worked very well then, they will work very well again. Great. Threaten to fine the worker for the employer being unreasonable. Not only that, it puts employer and employee at loggerheads. Not a good thing to do. That surely makes this a perverse and unenforceable law, because you cannot punish someone for another person's crime. Or is this the new Wales that Labour is trying to build? And if the employer is being unreasonable and calls the worker into the office, then when you drag the worker to court, I would bet a judge would not convict. But there's no way to deal with the employer, is there? Oh, but yes, there is. A £1,000 fine is in place for them. So why fine the employee at all? Anyway, the best thing Mark Drakeford could do is obey his own law and stay at home. preferably without a phone and no internet, before he breaks Wales. Moving on. Well, energy just keeps getting more expensive, doesn't it? But France and Italy both seem to be faring very badly. 2 of France's nuclear reactors have had to be shut down over safety fears, and the Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi says that escalating energy prices and the EU's approaching energy crunch need addressing. And he seems a bit miffed that the big energy suppliers are making huge profits. There are big producers and sellers of energy that are having fantastic profits. They will need to participate to support the economy. They too need to help families, he said. Presumably that means taxing them or forcing them not to pass the rising costs on to the consumers, and presumably go bust in the process. But when you consider that the EU's energy policy, as well as that of the UK, has been overseen by the EU Commission for the last couple of decades or more, then the EU has a lot to answer for regarding energy security. All it's accomplished is making the EU and the UK totally reliant on fossil fuel imports from places like Russia. Brilliant. And now President Macron has had to put his green agenda on hold while 6 eco-destroying fuel oil-fired power stations are brought online to cover the shortage. And fuel oil is yucky stuff. And the UK isn't faring much better with extremely high energy prices of our own. Oh, for a properly balanced mix of domestic energy sources that ensured we could maintain our energy security at reasonable cost over the bleakest of winters. But no, it seems that is not for us. So most of us now fill up our cars on E10 unleaded fuel to save the planet. But does it save the planet? But before I get onto that, I just want to say a massive thank you to all my Super Thanks, Patreon and PayPal supporters, as well as those that do buy a mug with my mug on it. Links in the descriptions box below. You really do help me keep this channel going. The whole idea of using E10 unleaded fuel was to save the planet, because E10 fuel contains 5% more biofuel than the old E5 fuel, so CO2 emissions are cut. Sounds good? Except there's a massive drawback. E10 fuel is less efficient than E5 fuel. That, as its number indicates, only contains 5% biofuel. Now here's what the RAC reported back in August. Current petrol grades in the UK contain up to 5% bioethanol, known as E5. E10 fuel increases the share of the renewable energy produced using crops to 10%. It's estimated that the greener fuel could reduce CO2 emissions by 750,000 tonnes per year, the equivalent of taking up to 350,000 cars off the road. But before the rollout of E10, there was an assumption that this new fuel would only decrease a car's MPG by about 1%. Now, it's not clear if that 1% was factored into the 6% CO2 reduction figure that they initially came out with. But even if that CO2 reduction was offset by 1% more fuel being used, so lowering it to about 5%, then environmentalists will still be happy. Except for the deforestation required to produce the biofuel, of course. But there are reports that car efficiency in terms of MPG has been markedly reduced when using E10. This means that the CO2 emissions could actually increase from using E10 fuel because people would have to use more of it to go the same distance. But on top of emitting more CO2, drivers would also be paying more for the same mileage, and that includes paying more tax. Now, the Express reports, motorists in the UK have been shocked at how E10 is impacting on their vehicles, with some telling of a reduction in how far they can travel of up to 20% per tank. Now, a 20% decrease in MPG does not lead to 20% more fuel being used to cover the same distance. Because if, for example, it takes 4 gallons of E5 to go 100 miles, that's 25 mpg. But when using E10, you can only do 80 miles or 20 mpg, which is obviously 20% less. Then the only way to fuel your total mileage is to increase the amount of petrol you use from 4 gallons to 5 gallons, because 5 times 20 mpg is back to that same 100 miles. But increasing from 4 gallons to 5 gallons is an increase in fuel use, expenditure and CO2 emissions of 25%, not 20%. That more than offsets the 6% emission saving claimed by the climate change lobby. Now, the Express article does explain that some of this reduced MPG could be down to the cold weather and gives some tips on how to deal with it. There is also the issue of the potential damage E10 fuel can do to older cars, and the fact that E10 fuel can gum up in very cold weather. But if much of this reduced MPG is down to the use of E10 fuel instead of E5 fuel, then have we just shot ourselves in the ecological carbon footprint? So what's your opinion on Mark Drakeford? Please like and comment below. Please subscribe and like this video, buy a mug and support me on Patreon or PayPal, and thank you for watching.